The mess hall at Fort Benning buzzed with the usual dinner hour chaos. Trays clattered against metal counters, boots scuffed across worn linoleum floors, and hundreds of voices competed to be heard over the din. It was Tuesday evening, which meant meatloaf and mashed potatoes, nothing fancy, but hot and filling after a long day of training. Staff Sergeant Derek Morrison stood in line with his Ranger buddies, still riding high from their successful qualification exercise that afternoon. At 28, Derek had the kind of swagger that came from years of proving himself in one of the Army's most elite units. His uniform was crisp, his bearing confident, and his opinion of himself perhaps a touch too high. "Did you see Henderson's face when he failed that obstacle?" Derek said loudly, ensuring others could hear. "Third time this month. Some guys just don't have what it takes." His friends laughed, though a few looked uncomfortable. Derek had a reputation for being hard on people, too hard, some said. But he was good at his job, and that counted for something. The line moved slowly. Derek shifted his weight, impatient as always. He was meeting a girl in town at 8 and didn't want to be late. As he scanned the crowded hall, his eyes landed on someone who seemed completely out of place. An elderly woman stood near the serving line, looking lost. She wore simple civilian clothes, a plain blue cardigan over a white blouse, dark slacks, and comfortable walking shoes. Her silver hair was cut short and neat, and though she stood straight-backed, everything about her seemed soft, almost fragile. She had to be 70, maybe older. "What's Grandma doing here?" Derek muttered to the soldier beside him. The woman held an empty tray and appeared to be trying to figure out where the line began. She took a small step forward, then hesitated, clearly uncertain of the protocol. Derek's impatience flared. This was a military installation, not a retirement home. Someone's visiting relative had wandered into the wrong building, and now she was holding up the line. "Excuse me," Derek called out, his voice sharp with authority. "Ma'am, you need to move." The woman turned slightly, her face calm and unreadable. She didn't respond, just looked at him with clear, intelligent eyes. Derek felt a flash of irritation. Was she deaf? Confused? He stepped out of line, his boots hitting the floor with purpose. "Ma'am, this area is for active duty personnel only. You need to exit the facility." Still, she said nothing. She simply turned back to examine the serving line, apparently trying to determine where to go. Several soldiers nearby had stopped talking to watch the exchange. Derek felt their eyes on him, and his frustration mounted. He was trying to maintain order, do the right thing, and this old woman was making him look foolish. "Ma'am," his voice carried across the immediate area now, causing more heads to turn. "I'm talking to you. You cannot be in here." The woman finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm getting dinner." "Not here, you're not," Derek said. He reached out and gripped her elbow, not roughly but firmly, intending to guide her toward the exit. "Let's go. I'll show you the way out." "Remove your hand," the woman said, her tone unchanged but somehow colder. Derek's grip tightened slightly. He'd been patient enough. "Ma'am, I am a staff sergeant in the United States Army Rangers, and I'm ordering you to leave this facility immediately." What happened next occurred so quickly that Derek barely registered it. The woman shifted her weight, twisted her arm in a precise motion, and suddenly Derek's hand was no longer on her elbow. Instead, he found himself slightly off balance, his wrist bent at an uncomfortable angle. She released him immediately, but the message was clear. This was no helpless grandmother. The mess hall had gone noticeably quieter. Derek's face flushed red. He'd just been physically corrected by a 70-year-old woman in front of half his battalion. "You need to leave," he said again, his voice harder now, "before I have you escorted out by the MPs." "That won't be necessary," a new voice cut in. Colonel Thomas Reed appeared seemingly from nowhere, his expression severe. Derek snapped to attention automatically, along with every other soldier within earshot. "Sir," Derek barked. Colonel Reed's eyes moved from Derek to the elderly woman, and something strange happened. The colonel's stern expression softened into something close to warmth. "General, I apologize for this disturbance. I should have met you at the entrance as planned." The word hung in the air like a bomb. "General." Derek felt the blood drain from his face. It couldn't be. This woman in her cardigan and sensible shoes couldn't possibly be. "Not at all, Thomas," the woman said, her voice carrying the easy authority of someone who'd commanded troops when Derek was still in diapers. "I told you I preferred to come unannounced. I wanted to see the real operation, not a show put on for my benefit." Colonel Reed nodded, then turned to Derek. His eyes had gone ice cold. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, you will remain exactly where you are. Do not move. Do not speak. We will discuss this situation immediately after the general has finished her dinner." "Yes, sir," Derek managed, though his voice came out as barely a whisper. The elderly woman, the general, collected her tray and moved through the serving line. Soldiers scrambled to make way, their faces showing a mixture of respect and shock. No one had recognized her. Why would they? She'd arrived in civilian clothes without fanfare or announcement. As she selected her food, Derek stood frozen, his mind racing. How could he have been so stupid? He'd grabbed a general officer, put his hands on her, tried to throw her out like some confused civilian who'd wandered in off the street. His career flashed before his eyes, and it looked very short indeed. The woman who would soon change everything sat down at a table in the corner alone. She ate her meatloaf slowly, methodically, watching the mess hall with the same observant eyes she'd turned on Derek earlier. She seemed to be taking in everything: the way soldiers interacted, the cleanliness of the facility, the efficiency of the serving line. Derek remained at attention, sweating despite the air conditioning. Around him, word spread like wildfire through the mess hall. Phones buzzed with texts. Whispered conversations rippled outward. Within minutes, every soldier in the building knew that a general officer was eating dinner among them, and that Staff Sergeant Morrison had just made the worst mistake of his military life. Colonel Reed stood nearby, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He didn't speak to Derek, didn't even look at him. The silence was worse than any reprimand could have been. 30 minutes passed. They felt like 30 hours. Finally, the general finished her meal. She stood, returned her tray to the collection area, and walked toward where Derek still stood at attention. Every eye in the mess hall followed her movement. She stopped directly in front of him. Up close, Derek could see the intelligence in her eyes, the subtle signs of age around her mouth and forehead, but also the unmistakable bearing of someone who'd spent decades in uniform. How had he missed it? "What's your name, Staff Sergeant?" she asked. "Derek Morrison, ma'am," he replied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "How long have you been a ranger, Morrison?" 6 years, ma'am." "And in those 6 years, has anyone taught you to judge people by their appearance? To assume that someone who doesn't look like you, sound like you, or dress like you doesn't belong?" Derek's jaw tightened. "No, ma'am." "Then why did you lay hands on me without cause? Why did you attempt to remove me from a facility I have every right to be in, more right than you, in fact?" The question hung in the air. Derek had no good answer. The truth was simple and damning. He'd seen an old woman and assumed she was weak, confused, out of place. He'd let his impatience and his arrogance cloud his judgment. "I made a mistake, ma'am," he said finally. "Yes, you did," the general agreed. "But the question is, what kind of mistake was it? A simple error in judgment, or something deeper?" She let the question sit for a moment, then turned to Colonel Reed. "I'll be in the briefing room in 20 minutes. I'd like to see the training reports from the last quarter. And Colonel, I'd like Staff Sergeant Morrison present for our meeting tomorrow morning at 0700. "Yes, ma'am," Reed replied crisply. The general walked toward the exit. Just before she left, she paused and turned back to face the room. Her voice, when she spoke, carried to every corner of the mess hall. "I didn't wear my uniform today because I wanted to see how you treat people when you think rank doesn't matter. Some of you passed that test. Some of you failed. Remember that the true measure of a soldier isn't just how you treat your superiors. It's how you treat everyone, regardless of who they appear to be." Then she was gone, leaving behind a mess hall full of silent, thoughtful soldiers. The sun hadn't yet risen when Derek Morrison arrived at the base administration building the next morning. He'd barely slept, running through scenarios in his mind, each one ending with his career in ruins. A general officer complaint could end everything he'd worked for: the years of brutal training, the deployments, the reputation he'd built among the Rangers. His dress uniform was immaculate. He'd spent an hour the night before ensuring every detail was perfect. If he was going down, he'd at least go down looking like a proper soldier. The hallways were quiet at this early hour, his footsteps echoing off the polished floors. Derek had been in this building dozens of times, but never for a meeting like this. Never to face judgment from someone who wore stars on her shoulders. Colonel Reed's aide directed him to a small conference room. "The Colonel and General Chambers will be with you shortly," the young lieutenant said. "Take a seat." General Chambers. Derek finally had a name to attach to the woman he'd so thoroughly disrespected. He sat in one of the metal chairs and forced himself to breathe slowly, evenly. Rangers didn't panic. Rangers stayed calm under pressure. But Rangers also didn't usually grab general officers and try to throw them out of mess halls. The door opened. Colonel Reed entered first, followed by General Sarah Chambers. In uniform now, she looked completely different, and yet exactly the same. The same straight posture, the same intelligent eyes, the same quiet authority. But now those qualities were framed by the unmistakable symbols of rank and decades of service. Her uniform jacket displayed rows of ribbons Derek could only dream of earning, and the 2 stars on her shoulders caught the fluorescent light. Both Derek and the lieutenant snapped to attention. "At ease," General Chambers said, settling into a chair across the table. Colonel Reed sat beside her, his expression carefully neutral. Derek sat, his back rigidly straight, his hands folded on the table in front of him. General Chambers studied him for a long moment. "Tell me about yourself, Staff Sergeant Morrison, not your service record. I've already read that. Tell me about who you are." The question caught Derek off guard. He'd expected an immediate reprimand, perhaps even formal charges. "Ma'am." "It's a simple question. Who are you? What made you want to become a Ranger?" Derek swallowed. "My father was Army, ma'am, served in Desert Storm. I grew up hearing his stories, wanting to prove I could do what he did. Be better than he was, maybe." "And have you been better than him?" "I've tried, ma'am. Made Ranger Battalion at 23, deployed 3 times, led my men through some tough situations." "Your record shows that," the general acknowledged. "You're a good soldier, Morrison. Your marksmanship scores are excellent. Your leadership evaluations are strong. Your men respect you." She paused. "But there's something else in your file, a pattern." Derek felt his stomach drop. 6 formal complaints in 3 years, General Chambers continued, opening a folder. All from junior enlisted personnel. 3 were dismissed as minor infractions. 2 resulted in counseling. 1 is still pending review. The common thread: your treatment of people you perceive as weaker or less capable than yourself. The words hit like physical blows. Derek had told himself those complaints were just part of being a hard leader, that you couldn't make everyone happy, that tough training meant hurt feelings sometimes. "Private Chen," the general read from the file. "You called him pathetic in front of his entire platoon when he failed a ruck march. Specialist Davis, you told her she didn't belong in a combat unit because she struggled with her weapon qualification. Should I continue?" "No, ma'am," Derek said quietly. "What happened yesterday in the mess hall wasn't an isolated incident, was it? It was just the first time you showed that behavior to someone who outranked you. The truth of it burned. Derek wanted to argue to defend himself, but what defense could he offer? She was right. He'd spent years looking down on people he considered weak, treating them as obstacles rather than fellow soldiers. He'd become the kind of leader he would have hated serving under. "I don't have an excuse, ma'am," Derek said finally. "You're right, all of it." General Chambers closed the folder. "Do you know why I'm here at Fort Benning, Staff Sergeant?" "I'm conducting a review of our combat training programs. Specifically, I'm investigating complaints about the culture in certain elite units. There's a pattern emerging across multiple bases, talented soldiers being driven out not because they lack skill, but because they don't fit someone's narrow definition of what a warrior should look like or act like." She leaned forward slightly. "Yesterday, when I walked into that mess hall in civilian clothes, I was testing a theory. I wanted to see how soldiers behaved when they thought I was nobody important, and what I saw confirmed exactly what I suspected." Derek's mouth went dry. "Ma'am, I—" She held up a hand. "Let me finish. You saw an elderly woman and immediately assumed she was lost, confused, didn't belong. You didn't ask if she needed help. You didn't inquire politely about her purpose. You decided, based solely on her appearance, that she had no place there. And when she didn't immediately comply with your orders, you put your hands on her." "Yes, ma'am." "Now, I want you to imagine something," General Chambers said. "Imagine that woman wasn't me. Imagine she was a military spouse who'd served 20 years as a nurse and had every right to use that facility, or a Department of Defense civilian who worked on this base, or a Medal of Honor recipient's widow who'd been invited to dinner by a grateful commander. Would your actions have been acceptable then?" Derek felt shame wash over him. "No, ma'am." "That's right, because what you did was wrong regardless of who I was. The problem wasn't that you disrespected a general. The problem is that you disrespected a human being." Colonel Reed spoke for the first time. "Staff Sergeant Morrison, I've known you for 2 years. You're one of the finest soldiers I've seen in terms of tactical ability. But the general is right. There's a rot in how you treat people, and it's going to destroy your career if you don't fix it." "I understand, sir," Derek said. General Chambers stood and Derek automatically rose as well. "Here's what's going to happen. You're not being court-martialed. You're not even being formally reprimanded, yet. Instead, you're going to help me with my investigation." Derek blinked. "Ma'am. For the next 30 days, you're being temporarily reassigned to work directly with my team. You're going to interview soldiers across this base, junior, enlisted, women, minorities, anyone who doesn't fit the traditional Ranger mold. You're going to listen to their experiences, document their concerns, and you're going to help me understand exactly what's broken in the culture here." It was the last thing Derek had expected. "I don't understand, ma'am. Why me?" "Because you're part of the problem," General Chambers said bluntly. "And I believe you can become part of the solution. The question is whether you're brave enough to really examine yourself and make changes." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I was a second lieutenant in 1978, Staff Sergeant. Do you know what the Army was like for women back then?" "I can imagine it was difficult, ma'am." "You can't," she said simply. "You can't possibly imagine. I had male soldiers refuse to salute me. I had senior NCOs tell me to my face that I didn't belong. I once had an entire platoon request transfers rather than serve under a female officer." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "And do you know what the worst part was? Not the ones who hated me. It was the ones who were good soldiers in every other way, but who simply couldn't see past what I looked like to recognize what I could contribute." Derek felt something crack inside his chest. "You remind me of some of those soldiers," General Chambers continued. "Not malicious, not trying to be cruel, just so convinced of your own way of seeing the world that you can't imagine there might be another perspective worth considering." "How did you get through it, ma'am?" Derek asked quietly. By being better than everyone else, by outworking, outthinking, and outlasting every single person who doubted me, by proving every single day that I deserved to wear this uniform. She touched the stars on her shoulders, and by never, ever letting them make me cruel, I could have become bitter, could have treated others the way I was treated. But I decided that if I made it, I'd use my position to make things better for the people coming behind me. She looked directly at Derek. That's the choice in front of you now, Staff Sergeant. You can dig in your heels, insist that you were right and I'm being too sensitive. Or you can open your eyes and see that maybe, just maybe, you've been wrong about some things. I choose the second option, ma'am, Derek said without hesitation. We'll see, General Chambers replied. Report to Building 237 at 0800. My team will brief you on your new assignment. Dismissed. Derek saluted sharply and left the room, his mind reeling. In the hallway, he leaned against the wall for a moment, processing everything that had just happened. He'd walked into that meeting expecting the end of his career. Instead, he'd been given something far more challenging, a chance to change. His phone buzzed, a text from one of his Ranger buddies. Dude, what happened? Are you getting kicked out? Derek stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, No, something better. I'm getting my eyes opened. He wasn't sure his friend would understand. Hell, Derek wasn't sure he understood yet himself. But as he walked out of the building into the rising sun, Staff Sergeant Derek Morrison made a decision. Whatever General Chambers had planned for him, whatever uncomfortable truths he was about to face, he would face them head-on. It was time to become the kind of soldier, the kind of man, who deserved to wear the Ranger tab. Building 237 sat at the edge of the base, a nondescript concrete structure that Derek had passed 100 times without really noticing. Inside, he found a small operation that looked more like a university research office than a military facility. Desks covered with files and laptops, whiteboards filled with notes and flowcharts, and 3 officers who looked up when he entered. Staff Sergeant Morrison, a captain in his early 30s, stood and extended his hand. Captain James Martinez, welcome to what we're calling the Culture Assessment Team. It's not an official name, but it works. Derek shook his hand, nodding the Intelligence Corps insignia on Martinez's uniform. The other 2 officers introduced themselves, Major Lisa Park, a psychologist with decades of experience, and First Lieutenant David Chen, fresh from graduate school with a sociology degree. General Chambers speaks highly of your potential, Major Park said, gesturing for Derek to sit. Though I understand the circumstances of your joining us were somewhat unusual. That's one way to put it, ma'am, Derek said. Captain Martinez pulled up a chair. Let me give you the overview. For the past 6 months, we've been conducting interviews and surveys across multiple Army installations. We're looking at retention rates, complaint patterns, and exit interviews. What we're finding is troubling. He pulled up a chart on his laptop, turning it so Derek could see. Women leave combat units at twice the rate of men, even when they meet all performance standards. Minority soldiers report feeling isolated and undervalued. And here's the kicker, when we dig into why, it almost never comes down to the physical demands of the job. Then what is it? Derek asked. The culture, Lieutenant Chen said. The unwritten rules about who belongs and who doesn't, the assumptions people make, the way someone can do everything right and still be treated like they're not good enough. Major Park opened a file. Let me read you something. This is from an exit interview with a female Ranger School graduate who left the Army last year. I could handle the training. I could handle the deployments. What I couldn't handle was being treated every single day like I had to prove myself all over again. Like yesterday's success meant nothing. Like I was always one mistake away from being told I didn't belong. The words hit Derek harder than he expected. How many times had he made people feel exactly that way? Your job, Captain Martinez continued, is to conduct interviews with current soldiers at Fort Benning. We want their honest perspectives about the culture here, both good and bad. And Derek, I'm going to be straight with you. Part of the reason General Chambers assigned you to this is because you represent the exact attitude we're trying to change. She thinks seeing this from the inside might transform you, and if it does, you'll be more effective at helping us fix it. I understand, sir, Derek said. Where do I start? Over the following days, Derek began his interviews. The first few were awkward. Soldiers looked at him with suspicion, clearly wondering why a Ranger staff sergeant was suddenly interested in their opinions about base culture. But as word spread that this was part of an official general officer review, people started to open up. He spoke with Private Amanda Foster, a 22-year-old who'd scored expert on every weapons qualification, but had been told by her platoon sergeant that women couldn't handle the stress of combat roles. She showed Derek the counseling statements she'd received for minor infractions, the same infractions male soldiers in her unit committed regularly without consequence. He interviewed Specialist Marcus Johnson, a black soldier who described being called articulate so many times it became clear people were surprised he could speak well. Marcus talked about being passed over for leadership positions despite high performance scores, watching less qualified white soldiers get promoted instead. He met with Staff Sergeant Rebecca Chen, no relation to Lieutenant Chen, who'd served 2 combat tours and earned a Bronze Star, only to have a fellow NCO tell her she'd probably gotten it to fill a quota. When she'd reported the comment, she was told to develop a thicker skin. Each interview chipped away at Derek's assumptions. These weren't weak soldiers looking for excuses. They were capable, dedicated professionals who wanted the same thing he did, to serve their country effectively. They'd just been fighting an extra battle Derek had never had to face. On the 5th day, Derek interviewed someone who would change everything. Her name was Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez. At 38, she was a combat veteran with 15 years of service, a Purple Heart recipient, and someone Derek had actually worked with briefly 2 years earlier. He remembered her as quiet, competent, but not particularly impressive. She transferred to a different unit shortly after they'd worked together. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Sergeant Rodriguez," Derek said, settling into the interview room they'd been assigned. Maria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I almost didn't come. When I heard you were conducting these interviews, I figured it was pointless." "Why?" "Because you're part of the problem, Staff Sergeant Morrison, or you were 2 years ago anyway." Derek felt his defenses rising but forced them down. "Can you explain what you mean?" Maria leaned back in her chair. "Do you remember Operation Enduring Shield, the joint training exercise in 2023? Derek thought back. Yes, multi-unit coordination exercise, simulated village clearing operations. That's right. And do you remember the planning session where I suggested we approach the village from the east, using the terrain to our advantage? Derek had a vague memory of the meeting but couldn't recall specifics. Not exactly. You laughed, Maria said flatly. You literally laughed and said, "Thanks for the input, Rodriguez, but let's leave the tactical planning to the infantry." Then you turned to your buddy and made a joke about how support personnel always think they know better. The memory came flooding back and Derek felt his face grow hot. "I remember now. I'm infantry, staff sergeant, have been my entire career. I've seen more combat than most of the men in that room, but you looked at me, saw a woman, and assumed I was support. Assumed I didn't know what I was talking about." "What happened with the plan?" Derek asked quietly. "Your approach got 2 notional casualties in the exercise. My route would have avoided them entirely. The after-action review noted it, but by then it didn't matter. You'd already made it clear whose opinions counted." She paused. "That's why I requested a transfer, not because I couldn't do the job, because I was tired of doing it twice as well as everyone else and still being treated like I was guessing." Derek sat in silence for a moment, Did you report what happened? To who? You were the golden boy. Ranger qualified combat veteran, everyone's favorite rising star. Who was going to believe me? Maria shrugged. Besides, I'd already filed 3 complaints in my career, all dismissed or ignored. I learned that the system protects people like you, not people like me. I'm sorry, Derek said. That's inadequate, I know, but I am genuinely sorry. You deserved better. Maybe, Maria said, but sorry doesn't change anything. Sorry doesn't get back the career opportunities I lost. Sorry doesn't make up for the fact that I almost left the army entirely because I was so tired of fighting to be seen as an equal. Why didn't you leave, I mean? Maria's expression softened slightly. Because despite everything, I still believe in what we do. I believe in defending this country, and I refuse to let small-minded people drive me out of something I love. She leaned forward. But here's what you need to understand, Morrison. There are hundreds of soldiers like me. Thousands, probably. People who have been told in 100 small ways that they don't belong. Some of them are tough enough to push through, but a lot of them aren't. And we're losing good soldiers because people in positions of power can't see past their own biases. Derek nodded slowly. If you could change one thing about the culture here, what would it be? Make merit actually matter, Maria said without hesitation. Not just on paper, not just in the official evaluations, but in the day-to-day interactions, in who gets listened to in meetings, in who gets assumed to be competent until they prove otherwise, versus who has to prove themselves every single day. After Maria left, Derek sat alone in the interview room for a long time. He pulled out his notebook and reviewed all the interviews he'd conducted so far. Patterns emerged that he couldn't ignore anymore. That evening, he returned to his barracks and found himself looking at his room differently. The Ranger tab on his uniform, the photos of his unit, the medals and commendations. He'd always seen these things as proof of his worth, his place in an elite community. But now he wondered how much of his success came from actual merit and how much came from the fact that he fit a certain image, that people looked at him and assumed he belonged. Derek opened his laptop and started writing a report, not the sanitized version he might have written a week ago, but the truth as he was beginning to see it. The culture at Fort Benning wasn't just flawed. It was systematically pushing out talented soldiers while protecting mediocre ones who happened to fit a certain profile. And he'd been one of the protectors. His phone rang. General Chambers. Staff Sergeant Morrison, I'm reviewing your interview summaries. Good work. I'd like you at tomorrow's briefing with the base commander. 0900 Building 6. Yes, ma'am, Derek said. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Go ahead. How did you keep going? All those years when people treated you the way they did. There was a pause. I remembered that I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for the soldiers who would come after me. Every barrier I broke down, every policy I changed, every mind I opened, that was one less obstacle for the next woman in uniform. Did it work? Look around, Staff Sergeant. Women serve in every combat role now. Is it perfect? No. Is there still work to do? Absolutely. But it's better than it was. And it'll keep getting better as long as people like you are willing to open your eyes and do the hard work of changing. After she hung up, Derek returned to his report. He wrote late into the night, documenting not just what he'd learned from the interviews, but his own role in perpetuating the problems he'd uncovered. The briefing room in Building 6 was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, and a massive conference table that could seat 30 people. At the head of the table sat Major General William Hastings, the Fort Benning base commander. A career infantry officer with 3 combat deployments, Hastings had a reputation as a traditionalist, someone who valued proven methods over new ideas. General Chambers sat to his right. Colonel Reed was there, along with several other senior officers Derek didn't recognize. Captain Martinez, Major Park, and Lieutenant Chen occupied seats along the side. Derek sat near the end of the table, acutely aware that he was the lowest-ranking person in the room. "Let's begin," General Hastings said. "General Chambers, you requested this briefing to present findings from your cultural assessment. The floor is yours." General Chambers stood, and a presentation appeared on the large screen behind her. "Thank you, General Hastings. Over the past 6 months, my team has conducted extensive research into the culture of our elite combat units. What we've found is both concerning and actionable." The first slide showed retention statistics. Women and minorities left combat units at significantly higher rates than their white male counterparts, even when performance metrics were controlled for. "These aren't soldiers who can't hack it," General Chambers said. "These are qualified, capable personnel who are choosing to leave because the environment is hostile to them. We're bleeding talent, and it's by choice. Our choice, not theirs." Major General Hastings frowned. "With respect, General, the standards in these units are necessarily high. Not everyone is cut out for this work." "Agreed," General Chambers said. "But the issue isn't standards. It's how those standards are applied. Staff Sergeant Morrison, would you share what you learned from your interviews?" Derek stood, his palms sweating. Every eye in the room turned to him. "Yes, ma'am." He pulled up his notes, though he'd practically memorized them. "I conducted 47 interviews over the past 3 weeks. What I found was a pattern of qualified soldiers being undermined not because of their performance, but because of assumptions about their capabilities." He clicked to his summary slide. Soldiers reported being ignored in planning sessions, having their expertise questioned despite proven track records, and being held to different standards than their peers. In exit interviews, 73% of departing female soldiers cited culture, not capability, as their primary reason for leaving. "Soldiers complain," one of the colonels said dismissively. "That's nothing new." "It's not just complaints, sir," Derek said, surprised by his own firmness. "It's lost capability. Sergeant First Class Maria Rodriguez, Purple Heart recipient, 2 combat tour, expert marksman, requested a transfer because her tactical suggestions were laughed off in planning meetings. Her replacement scored 20% lower on every metric, but he fit the culture better." Derek pulled up another example. Private Amanda Foster, top of her class in advanced weapons training, was counseled for attitude problems after she questioned why she was assigned to admin work instead of her rated specialty. Male soldiers with identical qualifications were assigned to combat roles without question. "What are you suggesting?" Major General Hastings asked. "That we lower our standards to make people feel better?" "No, sir," General Chambers interjected. "We're suggesting we actually enforce our standards equally. Right now, we have a 2-tier system. Soldiers who fit a certain profile are assumed to be competent until they prove otherwise. Everyone else has to prove themselves repeatedly, and even then their achievements are discounted." She advanced to the next slide. "Here's what that costs us. Last year, Fort Benning lost 37 qualified soldiers from combat units. If we calculate the cost of recruiting, training, and replacing them, we're looking at approximately $8.3 million. And that doesn't count the lost institutional knowledge and experience." The room went quiet. "But the financial cost isn't even the main issue," General Chambers continued. "The issue is combat effectiveness. In modern warfare, we need cognitive diversity. We need people who think differently, who bring different perspectives to problem solving. When we create a culture that only values one type of soldier, we make ourselves weaker, not stronger." Major Park stood. "If I may add something, General Hastings, I've studied unit cohesion extensively. What we've found is that cohesion doesn't come from everyone being the same. It comes from mutual respect, shared purpose, and trust in each other's competence. The units with the strongest cohesion are actually those with the most diversity, because they've had to build trust on merit rather than assumptions." "This sounds like social engineering," one of the colonels grumbled. It's operational necessity, General Chambers said sharply. We're at war with enemies who don't look like us, don't think like us, and operate in environments where cultural understanding is crucial. How can we be effective if our units only contain one narrow slice of American society? She let that question hang for a moment, then continued. I'm not asking for quotas or preferential treatment. I'm asking that we create an environment where all qualified soldiers are given equal opportunity to contribute, where someone's ideas are evaluated based on merit, not on who speaks them, where leadership potential is identified through performance, not through who reminds us of ourselves. Derek felt compelled to speak again. Sir, if I may, 3 weeks ago I would have disagreed with everything General Chambers is saying. I thought the system was fine, that people who complained were just weak or looking for excuses. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I was wrong. I've met soldiers I dismissed, ignored, or underestimated. Soldiers who were better than me in measurable ways, but who I couldn't see because I was too busy protecting my own position and my own worldview. And what changed your mind, Staff Sergeant? Major General Hastings asked, his tone skeptical but not entirely dismissive. Listening, sir. Actually listening instead of waiting for my turn to talk, and realizing that being a good soldier isn't about being the toughest or the loudest. It's about making your unit more effective. And I wasn't doing that. I was making my unit weaker by driving out good people. General Chambers smiled slightly. Staff Sergeant Morrison represents exactly what we're hoping to achieve, not changing who our soldiers are, but expanding their understanding of what makes a good soldier. He's still the same capable ranger he was a month ago. He's just learned to see capability in others he might have previously overlooked. The briefing continued for another hour. There were hard questions, pushback, and genuine concerns about implementation. But slowly, Derek saw the mood in the room shift. These were professional officers who cared about combat effectiveness. Once they understood that culture wasn't about political correctness, but about operational capability, many of them began to engage seriously with the proposals. Finally, Major General Hastings stood. General Chambers, thank you for this presentation. I'll need time to review your recommendations, but I commit to taking this seriously. Culture change doesn't happen overnight, but if we're losing good soldiers unnecessarily, that's a problem we need to address. Thank you, sir, General Chambers said. I appreciate your willingness to consider this. After the meeting, Derek found himself walking with General Chambers toward the parking area. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the base. You did well in there, she said. Couldn't have been easy, essentially admitting your mistakes in front of all those senior officers. It needed to be said, ma'am. And honestly, it was easier than I expected. Once I stopped defending myself and just told the truth, the words came naturally. They walked in silence for a moment. Then General Chambers stopped and turned to face him. I'm recommending you for a new assignment, Staff Sergeant Morrison. Derek's heart skipped. Ma'am. The culture assessment team is expanding. We're going to roll this out to other installations. I want you to be part of it. You'd work with Captain Martinez, training other NCOs to conduct similar assessments, helping them see what you've learned to see. I'd be honored, ma'am, but Derek hesitated. I'm a ranger. Combat operations is what I trained for. And you'll stay ranger qualified, General Chambers assured him. This isn't taking you out of combat roles. It's adding a dimension to your service. The Army needs warriors, yes, but it also needs warriors who can build better warriors. People who can create the kind of culture where everyone has the chance to be their best. Derek thought about Maria Rodriguez, about Amanda Foster, about all the soldiers he'd interviewed who had so much to give but had been held back by assumptions and biases. When do I start? 2 weeks. That gives you time to complete your current assignment and clear it with your unit commander. She extended her hand. Thank you, Staff Sergeant, for being willing to change. That's harder than most people realize. As they shook hands, Derek thought back to that moment in the mess hall, seeing an old woman and making the worst assumption of his life. At the time, it had felt like a disaster, a career-ending mistake. Now he understood it had been a gift. 3 months later, Derek stood in front of a classroom of NCOs at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. His presentation was titled, Recognizing Talent, Moving Beyond Assumptions to Build Stronger Units. In the back of the room, a young sergeant raised her hand. Staff Sergeant Morrison, how do we handle soldiers who resist these changes, who think it's all political correctness? Derek smiled. I was one of those soldiers. 3 months ago, if someone had told me I needed to change how I viewed people, I would have rolled my eyes and ignored them. What changed me wasn't being lectured. It was being forced to listen, really listen, to soldiers I'd been dismissing. Once I heard their stories, once I saw their capabilities, I couldn't unsee it. He clicked to a new slide showing performance metrics. Here's the thing. This isn't about feelings, it's about effectiveness. Units that embrace cognitive diversity, that actually leverage all their talent regardless of what package it comes in, those units perform better. They problem solve better. They adapt better. They win. After the class, Derek checked his phone. A text from Maria Rodriguez. Heard you're doing good work. Keep it up. You might make a decent leader yet. He smiled and texted back. Still learning. Thanks for teaching me. That evening, Derek called his father. They'd had a complicated relationship over the years, with Derek always trying to prove he was the soldier his father had been. Hey Dad, got time to talk? Always. How's the Army treating you? Different than I expected, Derek said. I'm doing something new, cultural assessment work, helping make units more effective by improving how they develop talent. There was a pause. That doesn't sound very Ranger-like. It is, actually. Maybe the most Ranger thing I've ever done. Derek looked out his window at the base beyond. Dad, can I ask you something? When you served, did you ever see good soldiers get pushed out because they didn't fit someone's idea of what a soldier should be? His father was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, more than I care to admit. There was this one sergeant, brilliant tactician, but he was soft-spoken, didn't fit the stereotype, got passed over for promotions repeatedly, eventually left. I always wondered what he could have accomplished if we'd given him a real chance. Why didn't anyone speak up for him? Because it was easier not to, because questioning the culture meant putting yourself at risk, because that's just how things were done. His father sighed. I regret it now. Regret a lot of things about how we treated people back then. I'm trying to make sure this generation doesn't have those same regrets, Derek said. Good, his father replied, and Derek heard genuine pride in his voice. That's more important than any medal you could earn. The next morning, Derek received an email from General Chambers. The subject line read, Culture Change Initiative expanding to all combat units. Inside was the announcement that the program was being rolled out Army-wide, with dedicated teams at every major installation. At the bottom was a personal note. Staff Sergeant Morrison, you came into my life trying to throw me out of a mess hall. Now you're helping to transform how the Army thinks about talent and leadership. That's quite a journey. Keep up the excellent work. The Army needs more soldiers willing to question their assumptions and grow. General Chambers. Derek printed the email and pinned it to his wall, right next to his Ranger tab. 5 years later, Derek, now Sergeant First Class Morrison, stood at a promotion ceremony watching Private First Class Amanda Foster receive her sergeant stripes. She'd stayed in the Army, flourished under better leadership, and was now one of the most promising young NCOs in her unit. After the ceremony, she approached him. Thank you for speaking at my unit last year, Sergeant Morrison. Your talk about recognizing assumptions, it made a difference to a lot of us. You made the difference, Derek said. You stayed when it would have been easier to leave. You proved what you could do. We proved it together, Amanda replied. All of us who refuse to let the old culture win. As Derek drove home that evening, he thought about the elderly woman in a cardigan who'd walked into a mess hall and changed his life. General Sarah Chambers had retired the previous year, her final act establishing a permanent office for culture and inclusion at Army headquarters. Derek had attended her retirement ceremony. In her speech, she told the story of walking into that mess hall unannounced, of being grabbed by an overconfident young ranger who thought he knew who belonged and who didn't. That young man, she'd said, made a mistake that day, but he had the courage to acknowledge it and the strength to change. And because he did, hundreds of other soldiers have had better experiences, better opportunities, and better careers. That's the power of being willing to grow. Now Derek carried that lesson with him every day. In every interaction, every evaluation, every leadership decision, he asked himself the same question. Am I seeing this soldier clearly, or am I seeing my assumptions? He didn't always get it right, but he tried. Every single day he tried. And slowly, one conversation at a time, one opened mind at a time, the culture began to change. Years later, when soldiers told stories about how the Army transformed from the inside out, some of them would mention a mess hall at Fort Benning, a general in civilian clothes, and a young ranger who learned the hardest lesson of his life.